I wanted my hydroponic system to have low long-term costs, which means that most of the costs are upfront. This video will cover how to purchase, gather, and build everything you need for the system to run smoothly later on. Check out the guidebook in the description for links, charts, measurements, and more information on everything. The shelving unit is probably the biggest single cost, so I'd recommend trying to repurpose shelving you already have on hand. I currently use a 2-foot by 4-foot utility shelf, but eventually I'd like to try designing a shelf from cheap lumber. For most of your shelves, allow for about 7 inches between the top of the downspout and the bottom of the light. You'll need one shelf for seedlings, which should be just tall enough for your tray and dome, about 5 inches. Each shelf has 4 4-foot LED bar lights. You can also use adhesive LED strips, which can be cheaper and customizable, but might be more work to set up. Run your lights on a timer for between 14 and 18 hours per day. Place your shelf next to a white wall, or use mylar blankets to reflect the light back into the grow space. To prevent mold issues, install some computer fans on your germination shelf. These only need to be running periodically throughout the day to keep the surface of the grow medium dry. Amerimax 3-inch by 4-inch downspouts are sold in 10-foot lengths for around $14 from most home improvement stores. Cut these down to a size that fits your shelf. I currently use 4-foot sections, which means I end up with a lot of extra 2-foot pieces. I'd eventually like to try out a system using 3.3-foot sections to eliminate this waste. Using a miter saw to cut the downspouts ensures the ends are flat and square, but if you're careful, you can also cut them down by hand. Clean up the rough edges with sandpaper and a utility knife. At one end of my downspouts, I drill a 2-inch hole for easy watering and use a 1.5-inch hole for the plants. These are spaced roughly 7 inches apart. In the guidebook, I've included a chart showing the center point measurements I use to get even spacing for 4-foot downspouts. Drill a pilot hole in the center point before moving on to the hole saw. When picking out a hole saw, keep in mind that the thinner the blade of the saw, the cleaner your cut will be. If you want to make a lot of downspouts, I'd recommend investing in a nice 1.5-inch hole saw with a thin blade and smaller teeth. A deburring tool is a great way to quickly clean up your holes without the mess of sandpaper or a rotary tool. Once you've cut out your holes, vacuum off as much of the plastic shavings as you can before cleaning the downspouts with soap and water to remove any plastic shavings, dirt, or grease. Dry them completely before attaching the end caps. You have a few different options for where to get your end caps. I first purchased mine from World Grace Project a couple years ago, but there are also several Etsy sellers making them now too. I eventually ended up creating my own end caps out of resin, and I'm now looking into the possibility of mass producing them from recycled plastic. Secure your end caps to the downspout with a bead of aquarium-safe silicone. Let this cure for 24 to 48 hours before transplanting. I've designed a 3D printable lid to cover the 2-inch watering hole at the end of the downspout, along with smaller lids to fit the grow holes in case you don't have enough plants to fill the whole downspout. If you don't have a 3D printer, you can use a website like TreatStock to order these custom parts. The STL files will be linked in the guidebook. I might consider selling these pieces along with the end caps if there's an interest. The grow medium I use are Oasis Horticubes. Their spongy texture allows them to be squished into the 1.5-inch holes with no need for net cups. They come in 10 by 20-inch sheets, so you'll need some 1020 trays and a humidity dome. After trying out several different varieties of lettuce, I found Mira worked best, as it grows quickly and doesn't seem to get tip burn as often as other varieties. Pelleted seed is easier to handle and has better germination, especially with pin-top horticubes. General Hydroponics MaxiGrow is my go-to nutrient formula. It's a 1-part powder that can be easily dissolved in water. This makes for a quick and simple nutrient solution. General Hydroponics has useful feed charts showing how much MaxiGrow to use in different situations. If you follow these closely, you might not need an EC meter, However, if you can afford one, an EC meter is definitely nice to have on hand to make sure you have the correct concentration. You also need a pH balancing kit. If your water is not between 5.5 and 6.5 pH, the lettuce plants will have trouble absorbing nutrients. The type of reservoir you need will depend on the size of your system. For smaller setups, a 5-gallon bucket works well. For larger setups, you'll want a tote or container that can hold enough water for a single transplanting. This will depend on how long your downspouts are and how many you plan to do at a time. I find 14 gallons works well for 6 4-foot downspouts. Extra nutrients can be stored in a smaller jug and used later for watering seedlings. The most complicated part of my water management system is the hose hooked up to the shower head. This may not be necessary for smaller systems, but it certainly comes in handy when making up large batches of nutrient solution. It also helps clean out the downspouts between plantings. I use an expandable garden hose, which is easier to handle indoors than a typical garden hose, with a thumb control spray nozzle. An adapter is required to attach this to the shower pipe. You may also want a shutoff valve to keep water from flowing backwards when the hose retracts. I have found 2 methods for filling the downspouts. The simplest option is to use a pitcher to scoop the nutrients. But I also happen to have a submersible pump, some half-inch tubing, and a valve left over from my previous hydroponic system. I rigged these up to be able to reach all my downspout watering holes, and it has made watering much quicker and easier. That should be about everything you'll need to start growing lettuce. Again, check out the guidebook for more information and a shopping list with links for where you might be able to purchase some of these parts and pieces. In part 2, we'll cover each of the steps involved with growing lettuce using this system.